Welcome back, everyone, to the podcast Who Am I? I am happy to report that I have Mr. INTP on the podcast again today. Last time we spoke about epistemology, how humans create meaning in their lives, and how meditation and certain drugs fit into that process. Today we continue on these topics. We talk about the relation between reality and our capacity to grasp it, how our knowledge of the world is based on the scientific method, and how common it is for you and me to base our entire thinking and our decision-making on theories that may be internally consistent, but are not provably true. They have merely not been falsified yet. You said for today you would like to continue where we left off in our last chat, which was December. I'm glad you're back on. So let's continue. Where would you like to take us next?
Right, so first of all, thank you for having me back on. I've enjoyed our last conversation greatly. And I've prepared a small summary or medium-sized summary of what we talked about last time, shortened to the important stuff that's important for my view of identity, how I see identity. And yeah, I'd start with that. So we started with epistemology. We said that's the philosophy of what's true, of what can be known. And if we want to know about ourselves, I think we need to know about what is and what isn't first. Mm-hmm. And at the very beginning, I start from the position of the ultimate skeptic. So we are born naked in this world. This is a great metaphor, in my opinion, which means we have no knowledge before we are born. We are born, and then we learn about this world in this world while being in this world. And that's not just true for us, but for all our ancestors too, which is really interesting, in my opinion, if you really think about it. Like, no one really knows anything. We all learn by trial and error. Mm-hmm. And so as the ultimate skeptic, the only thing that we can really know, that we can be sure of, is that we personally, everyone for themselves, knows that we have conscious experience. That's the cogito ergo sum by René Descartes we started with last time. And that basically means we know we have a conscious experience, but everything else could be an illusion. The world could be an illusion. You could be an illusion. Everything could all be in your mind, like in a dream. Mm-hmm. And that's the base. But every human we could discuss this topic with, including myself, we act like the perception of reality is real and meaningful, and that you are real, that you are meaningful. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense to talk to you about it at all. And so we play this kind of game. We set some rules. In logic, we often call it axioms. We define rules and we play by those rules. We use these rules to understand reality. Axioms.
Unconsciously, right?
I don't know, maybe they're even inborn, who knows, to some extent.
Yeah, this was a question I have. Do we choose to play the game? Or you say, okay, maybe it's genetic. That makes a lot of sense now that I think about it. But you and I are like to think deeply about things. So maybe at least we could decide to not play the game now that we have made some things that are usually unconscious for people a bit more conscious. Or do you think that we play the game and believe that our perception is real because otherwise our lives would lose all meaning and we would be depressed?
The last point you made, if you don't believe that the universe follows certain rules, that we could spontaneously explode for some reason, then we couldn't act in this world at all. We would have no issue with taking our lives. We wouldn't even talk. everything would be meaningless.
So that's an emotional reason, right? That's to protect yourself from the unimaginable consequences if life weren't real.
Yeah, and that's a scary thought, because it could
Yeah.
be that everything isn't real and that we are all making this up, or that I am making this up to protect myself, to have some security, some stability.
Mm-hmm. Just like people in the Matrix, even when they're confronted with the truth, usually decide to take the blue pill because, that one traitor even decided to go back into the Matrix after he had left it because he is more comfortable with the illusion. But then there are some people, like I think I would be, I'm not sure about extreme situations, but in general, I prefer painful truth to comfortable illusions.
Do you really though? I mean,
I don't know if there is a limit, but
right.
I think a bit more than what I see with other people.
Right.
I don't know myself well enough to know.
We talked about drugs the last time, and I think when we get back to the point of drugs, this topic may come back again.
Okay.
Because, in short, like I said, it changed the perception and, yeah, your sense of self. And this question comes back, like, what is real, what isn't? Okay, to continue. Axioms are things we agree on to be true without any proof. Things we agree on to be true is that we exist, or that the universe exists, that we can interact with it, that it follows certain rules, and like I said, we don't just spontaneously explode. And if we build on top of those, and if we, for example, have the theory of gravity, if we find that on another part of the universe gravity doesn't hold, like in space, we just extend the rules, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Other important axioms are logical rules, which is the most important of which, in my opinion, or from my understanding, is the law of non-contradiction. Something can't be and not be at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And other rules also help to coherently describe the world without creating contradictions. Then, yeah, each and every one of us builds a conceptual world around us individually using these rules. We put concepts over patterns we recognize in order to understand the world. Like, that's also what language is. We start from our viewpoint, and everything has to be in some way in a relation to us, what we are.
Mm-hmm.
Everything has to be related to something we can perceive.
That's very egocentric, but that's how we work.
I think so. I mean, yeah, like we start with time and space, hot and cold, good and bad. Everything is in relation to ourselves. Like space is, there's the right now, and then there's in the future, and then there's back, but it's always, we are at the center point, our consciousness. And the same with space. It's in front of us, it's behind us, it's above us, but it's always in relation to ourselves. And like I said, languages do the same thing. I can only tell you that something will be above you if you stand in the same spot as I did, for example.
Yeah, in linguistics, this is called deixis or deixis, I'm not sure. The use of general words and phrases to refer to a specific time, place, or person in context, like tomorrow or there. And such words are deictic if their semantic meaning is fixed, but their denoted meaning varies depending on time and or place of the speaker, or like you said, sometimes the listener.
Right. And yeah, that's pretty much all we can do as an experiencing agent that is born naked into this world. We can define measurements of our perceptions in relation to ourselves, and we can communicate them, or think about them, communicate with ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And then to understand reality and do what I think especially mammals do best is we have to create a model of reality, that we can predict things that we want to achieve. Like we have intrinsic goals, I think. Or yeah, you need some goals to act in this world. Otherwise we had no reason to do anything, to move, to think.
Yeah, another speaker of my podcast said that we don't have the capacity to recreate all of the world outside of us in our minds, in our brains. I don't know if it's a physical thing or just it would take too long. It's just not feasible. And so he called it heuristics. What you call model, right? It's an abbreviation. It reflects, it models heuristically the world around us. And that's why we sometimes notice a conflict between the model and the reality. And then we upgrade the beliefs, the rules.
Yeah, and last time we also mentioned that our perceptions are faulty. Not everything our models are based on our perceptions, but even they are bad. So it doesn't even have to be our bad models in itself.
Yeah.
And yeah, for example, a great example I always use is you simulate reality, so you can you alter specific variables, and then you can predict what happens. For example, if you want to throw a stone at a target, you simulate multiple ways to throw the stone, and you can predict if it goes above, below, or hits right center. And that's a little off topic, but I also think we have an inner simulation, a simulation of ourselves, of things we don't perceive from the outside, like emotions, feelings, what we like, what we don't like, our goals. And I think that's very intrinsically linked to what we are, this thinking.
Can you give me an example? It sounds very abstract.
Okay, so I have a simulation of the outside world, including my body that I can perceive. I can touch my own body. That's also the outside world, but I can't really perceive my emotions or what I like. If I, for example, like cheesecake, I can't touch this in any way, but I have a model of liking cheesecake. So I know if I have cheesecake in front of me, how to act. It's another
when
input.
I see when I'm cooking and I see chocolate lying on the counter, I automatically feel what I feel when I eat chocolate. And then I have to consciously go against that desire to eat the chocolate because I'm trying to eat healthy with what I'm cooking. Is that what you're talking about? Where you have a prediction about what something will feel like again?
Yeah, and what you act like, what kind of person you are. And again, with drugs, you can experience something called ego death, where you are not this person anymore, where you're just experiencing. You're in the moment experiencing. You don't really think to the past or the future. You're in the moment and experiencing. And that's very interesting because experiments have shown, for example, if you react to something falling and you catch it, your brain sends the impulse even before you consciously make this decision to catch it. I'm not sure if you've heard of it.
No, but similar experiments.
But it implies that your subconscious makes the decisions and your conscious mind is just a rationalization. It's kind of like the internal simulation that I talked about. At least that's what I think about.
Sometimes when I play word games on my phone, something like a crossword puzzle, and I have the letters to fill in, but I need to find out what is the word that I can, what are several words that I can build with these letters. I will get a picture of something in my mind of the word that that I can create before the word is in my mind, or before I have the feeling that I have come up with the word. So sometimes I'm aware of this happening, but most of the time it's just hidden, right?
Yeah, and I'm not sure how much you've read or experienced yourself about meditation or other Buddhist thoughts, and they often speak about calming your mind. Like your brain constantly pushes a thought one after the other. You get thought, and you're consciously trying to calm this down, and your consciousness isn't creating them, you're just getting them and perceiving them in some way.
Okay,
You know
so
what I mean?
calming is that you no longer get thoughts and that your mind can be empty to receive thoughts from somewhere else?
No, I think we always receive thoughts from somewhere else. It's always from the subconscious or from wherever. And we can maybe make a conscious effort to tell your subconscious or influence your subconscious to no longer spam you with thoughts that you don't want to have. That's again the thing you experience during ego death is you're just in the moment and you experience the moment. And if you do the same thing with the meditation, you just calm your mind. You don't want to think in the conceptual world, in the simulation, to say, and you just want to experience the moment.
Yeah, I've heard of that, and I think it's a very pleasant state if you can get there. I think it's very difficult, at least for me, because I'm not disciplined or trained, whatever, or experienced. And so what I often do is try to overpower my brain by giving it too many signals. And I think this
Interesting.
creates a numbing effect. So I try to listen to a podcast, play a game on my phone, just to be so busy so that other thoughts that my brain is constantly giving me are not coming through. And this is often something I do to fall asleep. I know it's not supposed to be advice for anyone, because if it doesn't sound healthy, that's because it's not. But I think this is more common than people believe. For example, gambling. I don't know this from personal experience, but I heard that gamblers, let's say they're on the slot machine, they hate it when they win. They want to be playing. They don't want to win because then the playing is over. They want to be in the moment of just being totally immersed in the game. And it's out of their hand what happens. It's just they're waiting to see what happens, and they want to be in the state as much as possible. Whether they win or lose doesn't matter. It's the process they want to be in to numb other unpleasant thoughts and feelings.
Yeah, this reminds me of two states I've heard and read about. The one is like you said, it's escapism in some way. You want to flee from bad thoughts and experiences. But there's also the state of, I forgot the name, but it's if you're very concentrated on one task and you're competent enough to achieve it, but it's not too easy, you're in this hyper state of
Flow.
flow, exactly. And yeah, the gambling thing reminds me of that, even though gambling isn't really too skillful if you're on a one-armed bandit or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I guess I said that because escapism is kind of like meditation because it frees you from something unpleasant, but obviously not in a healthy way and not sustainable either. But it's kind of a cheap replacement. So I want to get there again, where I can allow my mind to calm down and feel serenity in a more healthy way, and sleep better, have less nightmares, for example.
Yeah, it's a skill for sure. It's something you have to train.
But you like to make people aware that drugs can also help. Or would you say that drugs is another shortcut to get to such a state?
It's like many things. It's a shortcut. You get there very quickly and you leave it very quickly, but you don't really know how to get there. It's a shortcut. You didn't go the hard way, the hard road, and you didn't learn how to really do it and what all goes into it. So it's less valuable. I think.
Oh, because you can't
Psychedelic,
recreate it on your own,
right.
and you always need the drugs, and you build up resistance over time, and then you need more and more or harder drugs.
With psychedelic drugs, it's less of an issue of needing more and more. Like if you take it, you have a tolerance for 1 week, and in this tolerance, it's really not feasible to take more. And after this week, you're back to the 0 point and you can take it again.
But is there a frustration or a withdrawal when the effect wears off?
Not at all.
Okay.
And before you started, like I said, it's if meditation is climbing a mountain, psychedelics is being shot onto the mountain. You're instantly at the top, and it's always very scary. Like every time I'm a little worried, even though I don't need to, but it's always intense and a little worrying.
So why is it worth it then to go the hard road and to do the work and to earn the enlightenment?
I think it's because you really understand what goes into it. Another thing is if you're born wealthy, rich, everything comes natural to you. You have a great life and everything goes well. But if you start from the bottom and work yourself up and fight with yourself, be introspective and so on, you have a deeper understanding of what goes into it, and you overtake the other person. You end up in a better spot than the other one if you go the hard road.
I have another critique, maybe, of what you said earlier. You mentioned tabula rasa, that we come into this life with no knowledge. You have no children, I have no children, but I have been around enough small children, and I've heard this from parents even more so, that they come into this life with a personality, sometimes very strong or very obviously, that they want certain things, that they are, I don't know, stubborn with certain things. So how does that fit in with we pick up everything from our surroundings, from other people, from experience?
I absolutely agree. I don't think what do they call it? Blank slate theory or something? I don't believe it. I think a lot of it is genetic, of our goals, of our personality, even knowledge. Like I said earlier, the logic or something, I think it comes naturally. It comes from genetics probably. But it's again something that we just have. Like the example of someone being born rich and everything comes naturally to them. You don't have an understanding of it. You don't really know why it's better to trust your mom when you're born or something. You have trends, you have I think genetic nudges into directions of thoughts. You have some hardware and only specific software, or some software is more likely to be run on it or to fit to this hardware. If you get the comparison.
I think so. I also want to tell you how this reminds me of Chomsky's universal grammar. He says that everyone is born with a language faculty, and it's genetic. It's just part of being human. But then the question is, why does everyone speak a different language or have a different worldview? I mean, maybe Western people have, we could say, have a very similar worldview, but then there are people who believe that everything is a spirit, or I don't know. Some maybe indigenous people will have a different worldview. So this is the kind of differences we're talking about. There is a variety of worldview and just basic concepts that people work with. And his answer is to say that yes, everyone has the same faculty, so potential, or I think this is what you called hardware, but then it depends on the input, the signals from the outside, especially from your parents and then your community, because you end up speaking their language and adopting their worldview, no matter who your biological parents are. So you can take a Chinese baby and bring it to Brazil right at birth and raise it with Brazilian parents, and it will speak exactly the same as people who have lived in Brazil for generations. So that's a fascinating thing, this first language acquisition. And I think that goes along with what you say. One way he explained it was that we all have switches, and the signal then flips the switches in certain ways, so that we have one of the many possible configurations of the human language faculty by the time we are 6 or 8. You have learned your native language, and everything after that is learned more in a way that people learn a second language, which is fundamentally different from learning your first language.
Yeah, and with heritability studies, like we have twins, and one is in one family and you put the other twin in another family, then you see that even things like religiousness is heritable. How likely you are to be religious. And it doesn't even matter which religion, it's just a propensity or how likely you are to accept it or to like it, I think.
You're saying that's encoded in your genes and you pass it on?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a counter example, right, to what I said about language. Because there it's totally replaceable where you grow up.
I don't think that they're really related. I mean,
Okay.
you could have a child that is very high in religiousness, and you could put it everywhere in the world, and it would adopt the religion of their new parents.
Interesting. Mm-hmm.
But it's also someone that isn't high in this trait, religiousness, wouldn't be particularly religious. I mean, it's hard to say if it's causal or not, or if it's just another effect we find, but who knows?
Yeah. No, I'd never heard of those studies. I heard that you can pass on that. I don't know the study. I just heard this from a friend that the young people now have grown up, or no, we're old enough to be parents. We learned to use the new technology, let's say touch screens, and to use our thumbs a lot more than our parents. And so I heard that this knowledge or this propensity, this talent at using your thumbs on touch screens all day, every day, is something that can be passed on to the next generation. Does that make sense with what you have heard?
Isn't that one of the alternative theories to evolution they had? Like a giraffe has a very long neck because they always stretch their necks all day, and then their children also have longer necks or something.
I don't know. I don't know if that's a good example, because when I was on a safari, I I didn't believe this when I first heard it. The tour guide said, "You see these giraffes? This was in South Africa, in near Cape Town. You see these giraffes? They have long necks, and then giraffes in another part of the country or the continent have shorter necks. Do you know why? Because the trees here are taller." So I didn't believe this at
Yeah, I
first,
think
but the giraffe grows as much as it needs to get the food from the tree. And is that something that can change from one generation to the next? I haven't looked into that question. Or is it something that just every
I don't think
animal
so.
learns anew? That gets passed
So I
on?
don't believe the thumb thing you said, and I don't believe the neck thing with the giraffes. I think over many generations they are more fitted to their environment, and if if the family of this giraffe always lived in this environment, then they have necks up to the tree tops.
Okay, so maybe what the
I'm
tour
not
guide
sure
said
if you
is,
have one giraffe and put if you have one giraffe and put it in the other environment, I don't think they suddenly have a longer neck or
okay,
learn to have a longer neck.
so maybe it's just true, but over several generations. It's a slow process. It's a
Right,
microevolutionary process.
right. It's survival of the fittest, basically. If you can't
Mhm.
reach the tops, then you're more likely to die off.
Mhm. Okay, we got onto this topic because we wanted to find some examples for how things are hereditary, are passed on through our genes, and some things are just in every human from the beginning. I was trying to recap how we got onto this topic.
Okay, let's get back into the notes. So where we left off was to understand reality, we create models, and to be able to predict and act, we have to understand relations between patterns we recognize. And for example, there was a time before numbers. The relationship between counts and material things must have been like magic. If you, for example, in the morning, you put a pebble in the bucket for every sheep that leaves the stable, and in the evening, you take out a pebble for every sheep that enters the stable, you magically know how many sheep haven't entered the stable yet.
Yeah.
And if you don't know how they are connected, this really must have been magical. But that's one of the relations that we find in order to explain our world. And that's a good relation we found, but there's also bad relations we can come up with. Like, for example, a magical troll behind the moon causes the pebbles to be in relation to the sheep or something. We could make up an infinite amount of explanations and relations between the things we find.
Now, is this something that we could be doing right now? Like coming up with false models of our experience?
That's what we do all the time.
Because I think, or I have come across people, including doctors, who say that um, the theory, it's accepted by everyone right now, but it's only a theory that viruses are contagious, and they say it's wrong. I want to read, for example, the book The Contagion Myth. Um, I think bacteria has been shown to spread from person to person, but viruses have not. And that actually this whole idea of going viral is something that is false and that has been injected into the education and the medical system.
So with Corona going on, this is a very current topic,
Yeah.
and I've also read a lot about it. There's also, like, many years ago, I've heard about the questionability of the AIDS virus.
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's just an immune disorder. You have a bad and unhealthy lifestyle, then you get AIDS. And now I've read more and more stuff about viruses in general being very questionable, the existence
Yeah.
of viruses.
Yeah, one explanation is that they are just material that we shed because it's
The
toxic.
byproduct of our cells, basically.
Yeah, I don't know if exosome is the right term, but it's something that we no longer need, and it's something we produce. And so I don't know how. So the tests for viruses are you shedding this toxin? Which it's actually good to get rid of this stuff. But that is when you have symptoms. So when you have the flu, it helps you to get rid of all the slime, all the toxins. They're bundled, and then you cough them out, you sneeze them out, you blow them out of your nose. Maybe your digestion system is rebooting itself. It's actually a healing process. It's not something bad that we need to protect everyone from. And so I wonder how deep has this myth gone into the public consciousness for the last 100 years that it is commonly accepted, common knowledge, common sense for things to go viral, and everyone needs to be protected with masks and distancing and vaccines. You have to question a lot of things if you start being skeptical about that.
From what I've heard, they haven't really done they haven't tried to falsify these theories. They didn't put both healthy and these viral and non-viral material into living organisms and looked if they behave differently, for example. And they've never proven that what you said, that the virus spreads in animals. Like if you have one animal and it's infected, that the others will be infected as well.
Yeah, it's called the
They've
germ
never
theory.
done these theories, have these tests.
Yeah, those are called. It's called the germ theory. If you believe that a virus spreads from one being to another, and competitive theories are like environmental, for example, that if something seems to be spreading in a crowd, then it could just be something outside, some signal that causes the people or the animals to become toxic. There could be electromagnetic waves that are messing up our system and keeping itself working and clean. You know, things like 5G or just electromagnetic waves in general are never studied enough to disprove these things before the technology comes into the market. We just buy our phones and build radio towers everywhere and trust the people that say they're safe.
And once it's on the market, it's everywhere. You can't have a control study anymore.
If there's money to be made, then health and ethics are second rate. It's not as important. Yeah, so that's always disappointing. But it shows you the importance for doing your own research and not trusting someone in authority or trusting a news source just because millions of people have always trusted it.
Right, and that's like I said, we always make up these theories that could be completely nonsensical. We can make up infinite amounts of these. But we need a filter to find out which are relevant, which have explanatory and predicting power. And that's basically the scientific method. That's the best we have found so far. So what's the scientific method? From my understanding, it's you test a theory, you make up a theory first. So it's always fictional first. It's always
assumptions. Yeah.
Right. You make something up. It's not something you find. It's always created. And then you test this theory on all possible axes of measurement. Again, the measurement thing, everything is in relation to us.
Yeah, you try to keep some variables the same, and some will have different values or different states, so that you can find out what is the dependency between the various input values and the outcome.
I am looking at it from a farther view than you are right now. What every scientific field does is basically the same. They test if it's possible, if it's internally consistent, like logic, if it doesn't contradict itself, if it's externally consistent, if it's empirical, if you find proof for it in reality, and so on. Like there's multiple dimensions that we tested on. And then we take protocol of how we execute it, and we report the results so that everyone can repeat it. And that's basically, or that can be seen as testifying, like in court. You testify that you did your due diligence to make sure that you did not make an error, and that you aren't trying to deceive, and you're risking punishment if people find out that you did not do your due diligence. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Maybe you could give an example for how responsible someone is to prove, or how much. Can you give us an example?
If, for example, it comes out that you've faked your statistics, that you've consciously, or even if you made a mistake, but a very obvious mistake in biasing your population or something, you risk your whole credibility. No one will listen to you. All your prestige is lost if you find out that.
So this is not just in a court of law, but also like what you described reminds me of the academic society.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. In the world of science, we testify like in a court. If you actually testify in a court, you risk other punishments like jail or something. But in the scientific community, you risk losing your prestige and so on.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard from some researchers that sometimes your credibility, or the likelihood that someone will listen to you and take you seriously, depends on how much gray hair you have. Not your publications or your findings or your personality even. So there are lots of also unscientific things that go into this. And I've also heard that sometimes a generation of scientists have to die before an idea can become mainstream, because they have such a resistance against novel ideas. They're not willing to change the rules. They would rather ignore the data to ensure that the rules are still valid.
Yeah, it's very common to have personality cults and movements that all follow and even cheat to prove their foregone conclusions. And I think it's very natural. Like the older people, especially, they're comfortable and they don't want change. They don't want risk. And young people, on the contrary, they risk. They seek out risk, because with more risk you have higher payouts. I mean, if you're young and don't have much, then you can't lose much, but you have a lot to gain.
Reminds me of me talking to my parents about Bitcoin. Yeah. They want nothing to do with it.
Yeah, or on a smaller scale, my dad is all into Bitcoin, but doesn't go into all altcoins at all.
Okay.
So it's the same thing in a smaller scale. So yeah, every theory that survives this process is only a truth candidate and will never be more than a truth candidate. You can't.
Yes, nothing is provable, right? It's only
right. You can falsify.
Yeah.
And it's impossible to declare something as true. And there we also have Occam's razor. Like the more simple theory is more likely to be the good one, the best one, because it's easier to falsify something that's less complex.
Interesting. I'd never seen Occam's razor that way. I just thought if something is simpler, then it's more likely. Kind of because when you are trying to find the theory of everything, is that what it's called? Physicists are sometimes looking for this. Then they keep unifying rules that they've already discovered, like the five forces, trying to all bring it into one, like magnetism and electronics. Electronic fields have been unified. Can you do the same for the nuclear forces and gravity? And if you can, then you're kind of compressing, right? Like 5 laws into one. And that's, I don't know, that's been my approach to Occam's razor so far.
Yeah, I mean, you can have a theory and always extend it for special circumstances that your data doesn't fit, your predictions doesn't fit the data, and then you just make up a new rule, and then it's more complex and explains it, but it's less powerful.
It's like in language, there are rules, you learn grammar rules, but there are so many exceptions that I wonder how many rules our brain really uses, or if we just learn most things by heart. I wonder if there was a time thousands of years ago when there were less exceptions in languages. If this is a new thing. But anyway, my linguistic side keeps coming out.
I mean, it's interesting. I haven't read up too much about grammar and linguistics, but I think it's a field that's very important to understand, and it's very linked to neurology.
Yeah, and philosophy and psychology. I remember in my very first tutorial lesson at university, I was told thinking is language, because before we got into the studies, a lot of us thought language is communication. It's words, it's print, it's sounds, but it's so much more. When I was talking about the language faculty of the brain, that is something not separate from all the other brain faculties. It is very fundamental to how we think about ourselves. Not just how we talk about things, but also, like you said in the beginning, how we talk to ourselves about things. It's very conceptual and fundamental, not just communication. That's why it's a window into many other disciplines.
And with Newspeak, they often say, like, if you don't have words, if you aren't allowed to use certain words or something, it changes how you think about things.
You're talking about 1984, right?
Yeah.
I still have to read it, but I know what you're talking about. Yeah, or the same with Fahrenheit 451, right? If you burn enough books, then the ideas in those books will get lost after enough time. And I think it's true. It's a very scary thought, but it seems to be the case. We keep losing knowledge of things and having to reinvent them. For example, some architectural things are unexplainable by even today's standards. I'm thinking of Aztec and Egyptian pyramids. They have some very special attributes that we can barely understand with our knowledge about cosmology. And somehow they were able to predict, I don't know, the movement of the planets and the stars very precisely. I don't remember all the other special things about those buildings, but also the writings on the walls are not always explainable by our current thinking. So the scientific method is only one method. It might not be the ultimate way of discovering or describing truth.
I think we talked about this on the last podcast. There were other, what they call paradigm shifts. We had alchemy, for example, and it explained some things, but it wasn't as powerful as the scientific method. And of course, there could be more, who knows? it's impossible to prove a true thing. It's only possible to falsify, and you can also only falsify if the scientific method is the best or not. You can't know if it's the best.
Yeah. Another thing that I noticed earlier is when you talked about is something internally harmonious, true, not contradictory, or is it also externally contradictory? And I wonder if that distinction is artificial. No?
With internal, I mean, if, for example, you have a theory that it's hard to come up with something on the spot, but you have some theory and it can be immediately thrown out if it's not internally consistent, if it contradicts itself logically. And if it's internally consistent, if it doesn't contradict itself logically, it can still contradict with empirical data. Like you have a theory and it's great, it works great. For example, communism, in my opinion, is a great theory that works in itself. It doesn't really contradict itself. But if you try to apply it in real life and you gather real life data, it doesn't seem to work. It contradicts with the empirical data. That's what I mean with internal and external. Internal to the theory and external with the external world.
Okay, I see. I guess my misconception was that
you meant with mental and
instead of applying it to reality, I was saying applying it to established models of reality, because I'm not sure if reality uses logic. To be on the safe side, I only assume that humans apply logic to reality.
Yeah.
I don't know if you believe in intelligent design, that a human or something like a human is the cause for reality and the way it is, then okay, it's very likely that there is a logic behind it. But maybe all of the rules that we come up with, the models, are totally artificial. Even though they're correct, it doesn't have to mean that they are explanatory. The difference between description and explanation?
Yeah, there's also the map and territory comparison. Like the map is not the territory.
Yeah, I guess that's the right one. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we have multiple explanations. We have multiple theories for the same thing, and they can't all be the intrinsic working of the universe at the same time. It can't be both of them, for example.
But you believe that there's any rule that the
I don't
universe
know.
works by?
I think it's impossible to know how the universe really works, but like I said in the beginning, we kind of play this game that it follows some rules, that it always behaves in some way. Otherwise, we wouldn't even interact with it if we couldn't know that tomorrow the sun goes up again or something.
Yeah, that's something that we need and something that we do. But I wonder if it's really only on our side and not a description. We say that a rule is true, but that doesn't mean it really describes the reality. It only means that when you apply it to reality, you get back the result that it's not contradictory. And so in my mind, those can be two separate things. I personally believe in intelligent design, but I think philosophically, I need to be very careful.
But don't you think that even if the world or the universe is intelligently designed, that it still does follow rules, and the sun still goes up every morning?
It seems to be, yeah. Have you heard of occasionalism?
No.
That is the thought that maybe everything is random, and the rules are only a coincidence, and that every instant, this would have a huge consequence. That would mean that if you think of the universe as particles being in motion, it would mean that from one instant to the next, there is no causal connection, and the position and movement of every particle in the universe is random in every instant. And we're just living in one big coincidence, and the rules only seem to be rules. I think at least that's occasionalism, that you are experiencing an occasion, not something that can be reduced or compressed into a rule. I found a pattern. It just happens to be that way.
I'm not sure if it's related, but I've also often thought about the interesting thing about the, what do you say? How do you say it in English? There's flies that only live one day.
Yeah.
And a fly that only lives one day could have no idea about the seasons, for example. And maybe we do live in one of those seasons, and tomorrow the sun doesn't go up. Maybe tomorrow gravity reverses. Who knows?
Yeah, I think that's a very similar thought. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah,
I think it's interesting.
We can sometimes make life too simple by having too much of a closed world perspective and just believing that there is a rule for everything, and I or we as humanity already have 90% of all the rules we need to explain everything.
Sure.
And that's very ignorant. I mean, the more we learn about the universe, the more we understand how little we know about it. It's kind of like the deeper you travel into the universe, the more it expands.
Yeah, and when we talk about universe, I often think about the planetary systems and so on, like the far view. And we talked earlier about Occam's razor, and if we find something that doesn't fit our models, we just extend it. And I think dark matter is a perfect example. Like our models didn't fit, and then we have this dark matter. We can't see it, we can't sense it in any way, but it has to be there, and it's 80% of the universe or whatever.
So
I
I don't
think
know
it's a
much about
cop-out.
it. Is that we can indirectly know that it's there because of gravitational effects?
I mean, it's basically, we have models of the universe, and in some parts of the universe it doesn't fit. And then we predict there has to be something with very strong gravitation in these spots. We don't see it, we don't know anything about it, but it has to be there.
Does this include black holes?
No, I don't think so.
Because the theory on that is pretty, established.
I think dark matter is just, it's not dark, it's not visible. It's,
yeah.
They say just that it's there and that it has incredible mass.
Yeah. So it would be good to just be very careful about what you say. Not that we know something like dark matter exists, but to be more careful and just name the things that we do know. For example, that the current theory is not explanatory of everything, but that the mass of the universe needs to have a different property than the mass that we're aware of to make our theory more plausible. Or
yeah, the theory we have right now isn't perfect, obviously. There's something missing.
okay, so right now the add-on to the current theory is just to say that there's something with mass and it's necessary to make our theory work.
Exactly.
Okay.
And last time we talked about string theory and how it's not falsifiable. And there's also just, I mean, they are probably all internally consistent, but we can't test if they're externally consistent, if they're empirical.
Right.
And if we could just waste our time and just make up more rules and go deeper into this field. And
yeah. No, fortunately, there are lots of scientists who are not content with string theory, explaining everything, and want something more empirical, more provable. Wow, yeah, we have gone from the brain and knowability to the universe to scientific methods. I think it's important to always realize that we are still very emotional beings, that even you and I, who are INTP in the Myers-Briggs personality categories, have emotions and fears and don't want to go everywhere with our thoughts, but have our limits. But we're also very curious, and we need to somehow approach our lives and our surroundings from several perspectives to make more sense of it and to function well. And I think that's one of the purposes of the podcast, to exchange perspectives and to enrich each other in the process. And that's what I feel we're doing. So thank you again for today. And I'm sure we are not finished with the list of topics that you gave me in the past that you want to discuss. I know there's plenty more you could discuss, and so I hope you come back.
Thank you for having me.